So we have just learned about some of the fundamentals of collectivism from a psychological perspective. We've learned a little bit about how collectivism impacts conformity and identity and even emotions. However, I also want to integrate in one more framework, one more way of thinking about collectivism. And this view suggests that some of what you might traditionally think of as collectivism is a little bit off. So, first things first, I want you to put together your background knowledge, maybe what you know about these highly collectivistic countries, what you already know about collectivism, what you've read in the textbook, the information from this lesson. And if you meld all of that together, what would be your best mental image of a collectivist culture? What would relationships in that culture look like? What would it feel like to be a part of that culture? And just meditate on that for a second. Now, I'm curious whether the mental image that you called to mind felt at all like this. Are you envisioning this very warm and fuzzy, tight-knit community where people really, feel very close and intimate and everyone takes care of one another, right? Very cooperative, maybe a little bit kumbaya. That is the mental image that a lot of people, at least in the United States, have, and I'll admit that I've been guilty of that at some points too. But there's the possibility that that's not quite right. And this is really an argument that's primarily been made by this guy named Thomas Talem. He works at the University of Chicago. And really, he's trying to complicate this idea that collectivism means warm and fuzzy. So he's arguing that collectivistic cultures, involve a lot of highly invested relationships, but those relationships aren't always intimate. Instead of necessarily always feeling trusting of this tight-knit network of relationships, sometimes being so tightly tied to other people actually means that you're quite vigilant, watching out to make sure that people don't exploit you and that other people continue playing by the rules. And that sometimes what superficially looks like harmony may actually be just the best way of dealing with the tensions that always kind of crop up in human life. And he particularly thinks about things like this history of the different kinds of cooperation that used to be necessary when people, for instance, farmed together. He particularly talks about rice farming. And if you are having to closely coordinate with everybody else in your village in order to make ends meet, there's going to be lots of times when your interests are actually quite in conflict with the interests of other people. There will be lots of little moments of friction. But it's really important to make sure that those moments of friction don't explode your entire cooperative arrangement and don't ruin these very long-lasting, really important relationships. So the high importance of maintaining harmony on the surface might actually cover up some deeper underlying tensions. He also has some really interesting data he collected recently that kind of subverts some of our assumptions about whether collectivist or individualistic cultures are more quote-unquote nice. So, think about the following scenario. I'm going to ask you to imagine you live in an apartment with 4 roommates and you didn't know them before you moved in. They're not family, they're not childhood friends. One day, 2 friends of your roommate come over, and your roommate says, "My room isn't big enough for both my friends. They want to spend the night. Can one of them sleep in your room?" How likely are you to happily agree to this arrangement? So Thomas Talem posed this question to a bunch of people in China and in the United States. Now, you probably know what the results are given everything I've just said. But what do you think you would have guessed, let's say 10 minutes ago? Well, most people, even most psychologists, would guess that people in East Asia would be more likely to say yes. Again, doesn't collectivistic kind of mean the same thing as cooperative? It turns out the answer is no. People in the United States are actually much more likely to say, sure, your friend can stay in my room. So on that kind of niceness, you actually see more of it in a highly individualistic culture. So I'll be very curious to hear what you think about this alternative perspective when we come together in class. And next up is a video that's going to be exploring a much wider range of dimensions of culture beyond just individualism and collectivism. See you there.